The president's trip to Asia is his first since Republicans won control of Congress, a political setback that the Atlantic Council's Robert Manning says could undermine Mr. Obama's influence in Asia over his last 2 years.
We've seen China and the East and South China Seas become much more assertive over the last couple of years, and if they see Obama as a lame duck, they may decide that they can ignore U.S. protests to the contrary.
China this year has taken a more aggressive approach to the South China Sea, where Vietnam says China's Coast Guard rammed one of its patrols. U.S. efforts at a code of conduct for these disputed waters have failed to attract Chinese support, says American Enterprise Institute analyst Michael Oslin.
It hasn't worked. It's never going to work. And I think that our diplomatic energies should probably be spent more on working with our allies than trying to maintain the fiction that we and China have a working relationship.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington's not giving up on a code of conduct or on improving cooperation with Beijing.
The U.S.-China relationship is the most consequential in the world today, period. And it will do much to determine the shape of the 21st century. That means that we have to get it right.
President Obama came to office pushing an Asia pivot of military, commercial, and diplomatic resources to the region, but that promise was never delivered on, says Cato Institute analyst Justin Logan, and is unlikely to improve now that the president's facing opposition majorities in Congress.
I suspect that he would like to have a more strategic focus and would like to follow through on the so-called pivot, but even he, again, is subject to the pressures of the media, the news cycle, legislative pressures.
At a time when Beijing is expanding its influence in the Asia-Pacific, Logan says Washington's consumed with fighting terrorists in Iraq and Syria.
And I think that is where the pivot has really fallen apart because, you know, people are working 16-hour days trying to figure out who we want to win the Syrian civil war instead of thinking carefully about South and East China Sea issues.
If the president is to revive his Asia pivot, Oslin says his administration must take a more muscular approach.
And if they don't want their legacy to be the high-minded goal of a pivot that never went much beyond rhetoric and certainly didn't change the balance of power in a positive way that they wanted, plus wound up with much worse U.S.-China relations by 2017 when they leave office, then it's time to change your tactics.
Oslin says Mr. Obama can show both Asian allies and Republicans in Congress the seriousness of his pivot by backing United Nations mediation under international law in disputed waters, rather than a non-binding code of conduct. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the State Department.
These things because